So, hi, Chris. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Callum. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to have a chat today.
No, my pleasure to meet you and obviously speak to you again. It's been 6 months or so, I think, since we were last on your Last Dinosaur podcast, which seems to be absolutely flying since we last spoke. So it's great to have a chat with you again.
Oh, this is going to be awesome, and congratulations on yours. I think it's such a great medium to get out and to kind of, get out in the space and to do something a little bit different. I'm excited to listening to your podcast as you kind of develop it over, in the next few months and beyond.
No, pleasure. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you joining us. So perhaps, if you don't mind, if you can give us a quick intro, obviously yourself, your role, and then we can dive into a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Chris Aversano. I'm a product manager here at Q88, a Veson Nautical company. And my background has been solely in maritime. I started off the 30-second CV. I went to one of the maritime schools in the United States, SUNY Maritime. And from there, I just kind of fell in love with the maritime industry. Nobody in my family really had a background. A lot of great people that I know and friends, their dad sailed or they had an uncle in the business, and not in my case. I just fell in love with it. I sailed for a little while for Mobil Oil, and then I came ashore for them right when STCW and ISO, ISM came into effect. I started to write some of those documents. I actually migrated into the marketing group and then bounced into chartering, where I did some chartering for a while. And then I kind of knew I was working for Mobil, then ExxonMobil, and I really wanted to get to the nuts and bolts of it. And that's when I became a broker, where I spent 11 years as a broker with Charles Weber here in the U.S. And then I progressed a little bit. I went in, worked for a ship owner. It was a company that was owned by Apollo, a company called Principal Maritime. The fleet was then sold. I went back into shipbroking for Braemar ACM to focus on the time charter side. My original role was on the spot side. And then kind of after that, the cycle kind of was complete for me, kind of stalled out a little bit personally. And then I got into software. At the time, Q88 was about a year into a release of a product that was sold to shipbrokers. And Q88, like Veson, kind of recognizes they have to have, they have a lot of great experts on developing product and things like that, but they also need to have an in-house SME or subject matter expert. And that's kind of how I got into product management. And that's where I am right now. And it's been a really interesting role to jump into that for sure. So that's where I'm at. Amongst other things, I started a podcast, and along the way, I was president of the Connecticut Maritime Association. I was the COVID president, and that was kind of interesting too. That allowed you to kind of sharpen your management skills, sharpen your leadership skills, especially during a crisis. Although it wasn't as bad as, let's say, other for-profit industries. I know, like yourself, you started your business right around that time or right before. You definitely had to make adjustments along the way, and I was very lucky to have a fantastic board and support, and we kind of made it through. So that's it. Maybe a little bit more than 30 seconds, but hopefully short enough.
No, fantastic. Well, it gives us a great overview, and we'll discuss a bit more later about how that transition from the commercial and then the ship management side into the digital space. We'll go through that. But I guess, firstly, obviously, congratulations on the success of The Last Dinosaur, the podcast. What initially inspired you to launch the podcast?
It was sitting in my brain for like 2-3 years, and COVID and things got a little sideways and kind of focused with that, and kids at home and everything else. And as we started to unwind from that, I've never been known as a creative person, right? Not an artist. I have one of my daughters is like this wonderful artist. I'm never going to be that. That's not my deal. The closest I ever come is maybe I like to cook, not bake, but cook. So I'm creative-ish that way, but I never really had a creative outlet. And I also noticed that, going out, I'm also social by nature, not overly social, but social enough. And I thought that the podcast would be kind of an interesting creative outlet. It's kind of fun to do. It's great to meet and chat. You and I never chatted before we had the podcast, and now we've developed this nice kind of relationship, and like a lot of people probably had during COVID. And it's also a way to be social, right? It's creative in the way you can play around with things, see what works, see what doesn't work. And it's not like I have a multi-billion-dollar business that if my marketing campaign fails, shareholders are going to fire me. Oh, if, pushing it on Reddit doesn't work. Well, okay, that didn't work. Oh, well, this does work, so you can just play around with stuff. It's a really kind of, and I do this all after hours and on the weekends. And, some outlets like in Instagram, I have my kids help me. Hey, what's the best way to create a reel or whatever? And it's just kind of this cool way to be creative, I think.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you mentioned you're actually calling in from your mother-in-law's house. Is that right at the moment?
Yeah, I'm at my in-laws' house. They're up in the Hudson Valley, the beautiful Hudson Valley in New York. I actually did a hike with my son yesterday, 8-mile hike. So that was pretty cool. The weather was, it was about it was about 50 degrees up on the mountain. So that's about 10, 12, 14 for the rest of the world. And it was just a lovely day. We went for a hike. So it was really nice. We got to spend a little bit of time with them. And it was a half day of work for me today. So I'm able to kind of join you at a reasonable hour.
Fantastic. Good. Well, I was very fortunate to be your first guest on your podcast. And at that time, I was actually on holiday with the family in Florida. So
I remember that. Yeah, we talked about you kind of squeezed me in there. That was very kind of you. Yeah,
no,
was
not
excellent.
at all. It was good. So yes, it's kind of come full circle in a way. So it's great. I really wanted you to be our first guest, so we can obviously catch up. And I want to. You've got a lot of really relevant experience, which suits our background and our kind of clients and our network that we work with. So I think there's a huge amount of value you can add. So I really appreciate that. I guess.
Thank you.
No problem. So, I mean, with last question regarding the podcast, did you find it quite difficult to consistently kind of put out engaging content for your audiences?
I think I've been pretty lucky. I've always had like a really broad-based interest in maritime, and maybe that was kind of one of my undoings as being a broker. Broker have to be so hyper-focused on just the deal. And yes, I was that, but then I also like, wow, like this is, look at this technology that's happening with scrubbers, or look at, this is kind of cool. And, my interest in that and being involved in the Connecticut Maritime Association, also staying involved in Alumni Association locally here, of my university, and just kind of really liking and embracing and kind of absorbing the industry kind of allowed me to kind of, keep those creative juices flowing. I wasn't just shooting at the same point over and over. We've had a lot of great guests, and what has happened is, and I'm sure it's going to happen to you as well, is that I created a list, and this is what they tell you to do. Before you start, you put down 15, 20 people on a list, and you just say, okay, we're going to start doing those. And what has happened is all of a sudden you get a random email. Hey, I heard your podcast. I'd love to be on. Or I heard, I get occasionally from some PR firms. Hey, I heard your podcast. I have 2 clients that would fit really well with this.
Oh, wow.
And all of a sudden it's just coming to you, right? It's instead of you going out and having to be proactive or even ask for it, people just start coming in. So I think also a little bit it writes itself, right? A great guest that I had on was somebody I knew was a couple of years behind me at SUNY. I went to school with his brother, was Nick McCarr. And I ran into him in London. I think we and I were supposed to meet up. We just weren't able to connect. I think that's when they had the railway strikes. Mm. And Nick and I ran into him. We were chit-chatting, and then it occurred to me, he knows so much about CII. He sat on the committees at the IMO to draft and to represent the Marshall Islands about CII. I said, why don't I have him on? So sometimes it's just an idea will present itself just through a connection, through seeing somebody, if you're in London at the pub or maybe at an alumni association, say, hey, this person would be really great for the podcast. And it just kind of morphs, especially with all these things. Even a podcast I dropped this morning, Lauren Began, I want to have her on. She has her own podcast, but I wanted to have her on to talk about something to do with containers because I don't know anything about it. So to have, and she talked about the recent dissolution of the 2M, alliance. She worked at the FMC. It's perfect. But, a year ago, I would never have thought of that. She wasn't on my list, but it just kind of starts to come, if you pay attention to the industry, they kind of writes itself after a while, if that makes sense.
Good. Yeah. Funny enough, we shared a little post about it and about our podcast, and we've had 2 or 3 just inbound leads from companies like marketing managers from different maritime software providers. So I think hopefully there should be some traction, I think.
Absolutely.
Good. Great. So what we've called this podcast specifically the People Podcast. So we want to try and showcase the more human element of behind the maritime software. So each episode will be featuring a specific role function within maritime software. So this one is going to focus on product management, given your background. But before we go into that, just want to ask a couple of questions, or one question actually, more about yourself. So can you tell us 2 things that most people probably don't know about you?
Okay, so I that's a great question, and here are the two things, right? I think that most don't know about me. One is my middle name. Okay, it's Christopher L. Okay, so my middle name, people try to guess. Being an Italian last name, not 100% Italian. That's my dad's side. Is actually, and people say is it Luigi? Is it Lorenzo? Is it no? You'll never guess it. You'll never ever. Nobody will guess it, so I'll tell you. It's a podcast exclusive. It's Liberato. Now, not Liberace, because people like to be funny about that. It's Liberato. What that is, that's my grandfather's first name. Now, it was supposed to be my first name, but when I was born, at the time, it was a little different. And my parents actually said to my grandparents, well, if it's a boy, we're going to name him Liberato. And my grandfather said, no, please don't do that. And they were like, he's like, I don't like my name. We used to call my grandfather Al. So go figure. Please don't do that. I don't like my name. So let's just do something else. So we did it my middle name. So that's probably not a lot of people know that. The second thing that not a lot of people know, a segment of the industry knows, and that is, I'm from the Northeast. I don't come off like this. I absolutely love NASCAR and auto racing.
Excellent. Fantastic.
A lot of it had to do, I started to like it when I worked for Mobile. They would, at the end of the year, they would bring in all the cars that they sponsored. So they'd bring in the F1 car. I think it was Mika Hakkinen at the time. They'd bring in the NASCAR cars and a couple of the Indy cars, and they'd bring them onto the campus. You could take pictures. It was fantastic. But then when I was a broker, we ended up sponsoring client events to go to NASCAR. And I love it. My son and I just booked a trip for May to go down to Dover to watch a NASCAR race. I mean, it is completely opposite of a lot of things, but sitting there and watching cars go around and kind of enjoying the sun on your face, it's one of the 2 sports between that and hockey are much better in person. Amazing. Like 100 times better.
Sounds good. Sounds like a very different Dover than we have here in the UK.
It's still in Delaware, yeah. I think they're both by the water, but yeah.
That's right, yeah. Good. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so let's have a look at the role. Let's talk more about the digital transformation and moving into that space. So when you did initially shift into the away from kind of shipbroking and working ship management type of roles, what challenges did you sort of face kind of going into more of a digital focused position?
I think the biggest part was you didn't check a box at the time of, well, you don't have that background. You don't, technology. I mean, you're a broker. Like, what do you know about technology? And I think that, what Q88 recognizes, they could fill in the technology. They needed somebody to speak the language. And I think that that's kind of evolved a little bit as well. But I think that was definitely one of the challenges because you're put in a box, right? Oh, you're a broker. Or you're not. I'm like, well, no, I'm not. I have an MBA. Not that I ever really used that before now, realistically, but I have that. I worked in a marketing company. I also have leadership, roles with the CMA. I was vice president at the time. So there's a lot of different things that I think what happens is people put you in this box and they say, no, you're a broker, so that's all you're good for. I think that's changing a lot because companies are starting to realize they need to have an SME at least. And there's a lot of skill sets that are very similar. But I think overall that was the biggest challenge. And that was probably about coming up on 5 years now. I think that's shifted, but I think that's what I saw.
Okay, good. Understood. No problem. And with regard to the Veson and Q88, how would you kind of describe the way in which they're helping your clients with their digital journey, whether it's ship owners or brokers or that you work with?
Yeah, I think, our kind of goal and mission and mantra is really the platform that propels the industry, right? And that's kind of our overall, no matter what product we have, we want to, move you forward, which is kind of interesting. That's like the Veson model. And I think if I recall correctly, the Q88 one was, where the business of shipping gets done. I forgot what it was, but that's a CMA, but I forgot what it was, but it's very similar. It was almost a parallel track. So I think what we're trying to do is always just trying to, whether it's the broker, whether it's the owner, execute better with more information at their fingertips, right? In a lot of different ways. Certainly, I know Veson as well as Q88 has a voyage management system. Staying ahead of the curve on emissions requirements, right? For brokers, it's being able to export lists and fixtures, as well as to collaborate. Those sort of things. Definitely collaboration, really, for everybody. Across the platform. But those are the type of things we're trying to do, and it's exciting times for sure because we're a little less than a year into this. And it's just every day it's just, we see new opportunities to kind of make the overall platform better, which is going to help all of our clients, current and potential, I think.
Okay. And since the kind of collaboration, I say collaboration, but how has things changed? Has the culture changed in Q88 since Veson got involved?
I think the culture was pretty close. I mean, there are, nuances and everything, but I feel that it's a very inclusive culture. They're open to ideas. I think that certainly the Veson folks, with the Q88, as we started to integrate, there's no like, oh, this is what we do, so it's the right way. It may be, hey, here's how we do it, and this kind of way we've done it. What do you think? And maybe there's an adjustment or for so on and so forth, but it's certainly been very good. I think there's been a real kind of reaching over, trying to real effort to work together. I'm involved on a couple of projects right now where it's how do we figure out to make the systems work with each other. I know one of my colleagues is also involved in a big project to how to make certain things work a little bit better so that our users kind of have, easier interface, easier access to the info and kind of be able to work a little bit smoother, right? If we could shave off some time and make life a little easier and less prone to errors, we're doing our job.
Good. Great. Thank you. Okay. Now, so we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of specific role functions and things. So we mentioned this is mainly about product management. I know you've got lots of experience in other areas, but I feel like very, very apt at the moment. And we have a number of clients that hire and have a number of product managers in their team. But just for our audience perspective, in case they don't know, in your words, how would you define the role of a product manager within a maritime software type of business?
So I'm going to say something slightly controversial. See, this would be good. You can use this right now off the front top. But in a way, right, it can be described. So if you're a product manager, you're the captain of the ship of that product, right? So if I run a product that, let's say, I work for, somebody has a whole suite of products, Kongsberg or let's say DNV or somebody, but they have an individual product that they sell. You are the captain of that ship because you work with marketing, you work with sales, you work with developers, you work with strategy, you own the roadmap. You are the captain of that ship, right? So even though a lot of those groups don't have direct reports to you, as a matter of fact, where I'm at, I don't have anybody that's a direct report to me. And I'm relatively senior within our group. I have 0 direct reports, but I have a lot of accountabilities. People are accountable to me to assure that development gets done, to assure that design gets done. And you have to be able to manage that. And then you're accountable for everything that happens, up into senior product people and ultimately into the C-suite, right? Because everything, you're accountable for everything. So I kind of equate it to the captain of the ship, the CEO of the company. Maybe not necessarily CEO because you're not really too concerned about HR. But if you say, hey, this strategy that you want to put before me says we got to have a marketing campaign that goes out twice a month and we don't have the marketing people for it or the budget, then you get into HR issues, right? You may, in a side way, you have to stand up and say, I need more people or I need more budget. So it does get a little bit into that in that way. There's about 1 million different ways to describe product management, but I think being in the shipping industry is probably comes down to describe, if you're a product manager, you're the captain of the ship for that product or that part of the product. If you're dealing with a big, like I know that on the Veson side, we have several product managers, they deal with big chunks of the whole, so to speak.
Okay. And I think from what my impression and experiences, some companies have different sort of terminology. So sometimes it might be product owner or product manager. Do you split them up as different things, or do you think? So
those are actually two different roles, because a product owner is more focused kind of on a little bit more of a granular level, where product manager does a lot more on the outside. What is going on the outside and bringing that in. Sometimes you wear both hats. A lot of times I do. I know in Q88, product owner sits in with this whole Scrum methodology, which is part of Agile. Yeah. And he or she will be part of kind of that role. Whereas product manager really is not only kind of overseeing all this, but then also has very much an eye to strategy and to the clients. Don't want to forget that, and not the clients on, oh, I want you to implement, make this button blue instead of green, but, oh, we see a trend in the industry, right? Like a good product manager 2 years ago said, hey, we got these regulations coming up. We're going to have to prepare for it today because on January 1st, 2023, we're going to have a change, right? So you're looking at that 18 months ago. That's where, and you start to think about what is the trends? What will our clients need? So you're talking to the clients in the spring of 2021, into the summer to start to figure out, knowing that by the end of 2022, you got to have something in place. So that's where the product manager, where product owner kind of, once we know what we want to do, it gets a little more granular. Yeah. So there are differences actually. Yeah.
And I mean, they're also on the product kind of market insight as well. How would you kind of, sorry to pick your brains a bit, but how would that, you explain that kind of function? Could it relate to the other two, or is it separate as well?
No, I mean, when you're looking at the market, part of the product owner or product manager, is, you are the voice of the client as well, right? Which you have to know, what are they thinking? What's going on in the market, right? What pressures they're seeing, right? And I think that's really important to stay involved in the industry, to go to conferences, even just reading articles, whether it's Tradewinds, Splash, Lloyd's, there's so much free content now. You could pick and choose what you want and really get a good overview and kind of get into the psyche and kind of what your clients, what your end users are seeing in terms of that regards. And that's a very important part of the role, more as product manager and senior product type thing, because you can also then help dictate strategy, right? Say, well, we need to allocate resources for CII. And now we need to know that, the IMO is going to have their meeting next year. MEPC, I think it's 80, where they're going to readjust some of the CII. So you're going to have to be in a position to make adjustments at some point in the future. You don't need to know necessarily exactly what they are. You just need to know that by whatever date they're going to set, you're going to have to make an adjustment. So you need to go backwards on how to, when do we start talking to clients? How are they going to react? What are they going to need? And along those sort of things. Sanctions are another great issue. What are they going to need? How are they going to need it? There's a lot by just keeping, tuned into the market. You're representing your clients. And by doing that, you're hopefully positioning yourself well.
Okay. Good. So as well as obviously being aware of what's happening in the markets and with your clients, are there any other kind of key skills or traits that could help make a successful product manager?
Yeah, I think, I think knowing the clients, knowing the market, what they want, knowing your product, obviously. And then of course, knowing technology. And what do I mean? I don't mean you have to know how to program. I mean, you have to understand how, let's say, an API works. What's the different delivery methods? Why is that important? Those sort of things. You don't need to know how to build an API, maybe take a class. Again, there are so much free learning out there. You can sit there on YouTube and kind of have a good overview within a short while. To this day, I hear somebody say something, a term that I don't know what it is. I write it down on my notebook and we're done with the meeting. I Google it. And if I really want to deep dive, you can go on LinkedIn with classes. My company has a great resource of library, and I could spend a half an hour taking a class about that topic, and then I'm better off. So you have to know the technology only to the extent of kind of what's being used. And, does your development team have an expertise in it? And it's something that let's say as a company, you support the use of, because there may be some technologies that, no, we don't do it this way, we do it this way. So you just have to have an awareness of that, of the limitations, and so that you're not over promising to clients, which is a fundamental business mantra.
Okay, and I guess kind of leaning on for the kind of skills, I guess it's more to do with the background of the individual. So in your view, do you think having a maritime background is essential to be a successful product manager, or even perhaps a sales manager within the maritime software space?
I don't think it's essential. I think, what I personally think is, if you're building a product team, or you're building a sales team, or you're building a brokerage team, you don't want to have everybody be cookie cutter the same. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a product team, you had two people and they come up through traditional product ranks, maybe I work for a SaaS company. So maybe they work for a SaaS company and something else, consumer to consumer, or maybe business to business, but farming equipment, let's say, I don't know, whatever. But you're building a maritime company, but they have these skill sets to know how to do things. It's good to interject at that point, maybe somebody with some maritime background, because you need to have that ability to kind of point everybody else in the right direction, which is what has, one of the things that we've worked really well with the Veson folks, a lot of great folks who've come up through the ranks within Veson, but didn't come from the industry, let's say. It didn't come from the industry. So now it's kind of like, okay, we can help out a little bit, but Veson's been great because they do have a lot of people from the industry, but certainly we complemented that well. So I think it's important to kind of have a well-balanced team. Even, I go back to like my broking days. Some of the senior brokers that I worked with, one guy was an accountant. One guy was an accountant for the firm and then became a broker. One guy was studying to be a school teacher, a elementary school teacher. Now, the other guy who ran the company at the time, his father was in shipping, his uncles were in shipping, so he was a Greek American. I mean, that's just what it was. But there was a lot of other people who don't have that proper shipping background to go in. So I think it comes about balance. You always want to have a balance. You have too many people seeing the same way, you're going to end up getting a group think, which is not going to be good.
Great. No, good. I think from our point of view, from I guess the recruiting side, depending on the company we're working with, that they might specifically say, right, the candidate has to have experience perhaps being on board a ship. If they're selling, they're going to be selling a vessel performance sort of focused solution, they need to have like maybe a naval architecture or naval engineering, marine engineering type of background. So I think there's definitely certain cases where it adds a lot of value to have that experience. But no, great. I think it's a real good insight to see that it depends on the makeup of the team.
It really does, because for even for a sales guy, I mean, you could have a saleswoman that's just a rock star. She could sell a coal to Newcastle, right? I mean, that's ice to Eskimos sort of thing. Yeah. Like, you could do that. You could sell anything, but there is also sometimes. I go back to this too, and this is why it's important to have the diversity, the diverse kind of viewpoint, especially if you have a company that says, no, we only hire tech people, we'll teach you maritime. The maritime business especially is unique. As you know, is a relationship built business. So if you're a relationship built business, you got to know where to start. And having somebody who's been in a business for a while definitely gives you that maybe added push. You know, maybe they went to school together, or they worked for the same company. I remember at one point, Stolt, there were so many people who like left, who would kind of go through Stolt, right? So you think you had that whole little thing where people were ex-Stolt, not because they were just turning over because they moved to Houston and then they moved on, did some other stuff. So, there's like these kind of cluster of people, ExxonMobil people. There's a lot of us kicking around. So there's that kind of cluster that you have a relationship with that it lends well, let's say.
Yeah. I think from our point of view, I mean, when I started the business, so I'm from a shipbroking family. My granddad was an S&P broker. So was my mum for many years. And I think having that combination of shipbroking and recruitment experience has opened up so many doors when we initially founded Callum Beaumont in 2019. So for us, from our point of view, it's helped us hugely because we kind of have a little bit of an insight into perhaps what their solution, how it's helping their end clients. So if it's a chartering focused solution, we have a little bit of an overview of how to fix a ship and what different terminology means and that sort of stuff. So I think, some companies will definitely value from having people from the industry, but there's always going to be an argument if you've got the right balance that it just depends. And who the audience is really, and who the buyer is. If they really want to speak to someone that has an understanding of what they're selling and what they're doing, their market, then that will play a factor as well from what we're seeing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's why I think, striking a balance, because you could bring different perspective on different things. I know just internally, like I was really lucky from the Q88 side, I had two of my fellow product managers, both worked for shipping companies, but were tech driven background. And they've helped me a lot with like, hey, I have this problem. Like, am I understanding this right? A tech problem. And they'd be like, no, let's do this way. But then also every now and again, they're like, what is, our client said this. What does this mean? Oh, okay. It means I could just, it means X, right? And I can understand, okay, that's what I thought, but I needed some guidance. And it works well because you can play off each other. You can play off experience and play off backgrounds. I think that's probably how you build a better team ultimately, right? Too many people of this cut from the same cloth. You're going to get that group think, and that's not going to be good.
Yeah. Good. No, well, thank you so much for your time. I know you obviously with family and things. I don't want to keep you any longer, but no, it really has been a pleasure speaking to you, Christopher. And thanks for joining us on our first episode. So for our audience, obviously, I'm sure they're familiar with you and your podcast, The Last Dinosaur. But how is it best for them to contact you? Is it all right for them to message you on LinkedIn or?
LinkedIn, yeah. LinkedIn's great. I'm on all the places that you'll find your podcast, wherever you're at. I try to release every other week with some maybe a little more frequent every now and again. But, follow is always great. LinkedIn's always great. Feel free to reach out. I usually check my messages there or leave a comment. I'll check those on a pretty regular basis. But I wish you the best. I hope you have success and this is a fruitful endeavor for the company. I'm excited to be the first person on. I hope I bring you a lot of views and all that stuff. So
yeah, no, great. Right. Fantastic to have you. And I'll be listening to your podcast regularly as I do. And we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you, Cal. I appreciate it, man.
Pleasure. Take care. Thanks, Chris.